So it has come to this, COVID-19 restrictions, and I'm down to doing a tutorial on how to plaster. So I'm going to plaster old jib. See the gap there is not like the modern ones, it doesn't have that little indentation, which is helpful, so it's slightly more difficult, but still the same sort of process. I am not a professional. So for your edification, I shall begin. Okay, to start with, I'm using +4. So that's the one that I've used for a long time. It's already pre-mixed. And what you have to do with it is that you have to give it a really good stir. So it's you get all the air bubbles out of it, and it's a nice, lovely consistency, nice and even. And it's easy to use and a little bit wet. This could even be a little wetter. What I'm using is a trowel like this. It's cheap. When you choose your trowel, just make sure it's got a nice little bend on it. That's another alternative trowel. And I use one of these. So it's mid-range, it's not expensive, it's not the cheapest. Again, it's fairly stiff and nice and easy for those plasterings. The tape. So just paper tape, standard roll of paper tape you can get from Bunnings. The one I've chosen is, if you can see that, it's got the seam. Okay, so this is useful for corners and flats. And when you put it on a flat, just remember that the little indentation must come outwards, if you can see that. Yeah? Oh, I mean in. It's got to have a little V shape in. If you place it that way round, air might get underneath and it will bubble out. Okay? So it has to go like a little V shaped facing outwards. So in this case, pre-cut your reinforcing tape the length of the wall so you have it ready, so you don't have to muck around. You can work directly from your tub, or you have a nice flat area that you can mix with. As long as it's nice and flat, in this case it's just an old piece of jib, but it has to be clean and tidy. And then you can put your plaster on there for you to mix and get right. Before you begin, super important, remove cats. They tend to love plastering. So when you go over your area, if you're using new jib, it's not so much of a problem. Just run that over all the surface and make sure there is nothing sticking out. Okay? Preparation is really important. When you're using plaster, if you happen to drop some on the floor, I mean, you can use a drop cloth. If you're careful, you can minimize it, but if you do, one suggestion is you either pick it up straight away with a wet cloth, but if you drop a huge amount, that's messy. If you leave it to dry, you can get it off pretty much any surface without too much trouble. I've tried. Okay, now to begin. So you get different people have slightly different techniques. So what you're doing is you're putting your plaster, you're starting from, in this case, the top or the bottom, and go up. And just chuck it on. Like Katie. chuck it on. The entire width of what you're doing in this case, all the way down to the bottom.
And you make sure that the kitten isn't stuck to the wall. This is Kit.
Kids love playing with tape, getting involved with the process, jumping in things. Okay, so what you're doing is that you're putting enough plaster, probably about 3 or 4 mils at least, over the join that you're doing. And it has to be, I like to do around about that wide, okay? Your tape is that wide, you put your plaster on wider, and if you've got one of those ones with the little indentations with joiners, fill that indentation nice and good. So, you can smooth it off a little bit if you wish. Remember that you're using, or you're leaving about 3 or 4 mils thickness. So you simply get your reinforcing tape. You start at one place, right over the join. And then you run this down. So it sits over the join. And that's about it for the first coat. Do make sure it's straight. Put your excess back to your mixing place. And then tidy that up. You're squashing the tape into that join. Okay, so then you just remove some of the excess. You don't want to squash the tape down too much because you don't want to get rid of what's in behind it. So if it's hard to see, so that's the tape and the plaster. You just run down, smooth it down, and you get rid of your excess. When you're running it down the side of the tape to get rid of the excess, you can put a little bit more pressure on one side, here on the outside, and less pressure on the tape side, and that can help. Okay, tidy that up a bit, eh? Run it down, get rid of the excess, you can run it up. The more excess you can get rid of, the better. One thing I forgot. Like I said, I'm not a professional. So after you've done your first coat, tape, wiped it off, then you can do a second coat. So this is useful for a new jib, I suppose old jib too, when there's that indentation on both sides. So this is a coat over the top of the plaster and then the tape. So you do the same thing. You look to put in your plaster a little wider than the tape, so it goes over that indentation area. So you put lots on. Okay. And then you just run it down. So remember, these are flexible. Yeah. So what you can do is put slightly more pressure on the outside and less pressure over where the tape is, and it helps to feather it out a little bit. So you run it down in the middle, get rid of your excess. Oops. That's what happens. And then you can feather it out on either side. Okay, so then it's nice and smooth, and you may have a slightly, in this case I do, may have a slightly raised area over where the tape is, because there's no indentation on this old jib. But that's okay, you'll get it on your next coats. Don't put too much pressure on. Run it down one side and the other. Don't worry about little indentations or score marks. If there's a little bit of dirt underneath, you'll get that in your next coat. What you're looking to do is making it relatively smooth. Now, trick is, don't try to overwork this, because when it dries, it sticks. Okay, so that's the next step. Leave it to dry. Okay, so doing corners. So the only corner I've got left to do is just this small little one, and you see there is quite a big gap in between this jib board and that jib board. So for that gap, probably should do a little plaster fill first, because it's kind of thick and it will take a little while to dry. However, I'll just proceed. So, same principle. You get your plaster, which is nicely worked with all the air bubbles out, and you just simply fill the corner. You run it downwards, making sure in this case you really take time to push all the plaster into the corner so there is no air gaps, and you push it in. Yeah, you smooth it off just a little bit, leaving some excess. So at this stage you don't really press it in. If you notice, this jib here does have that little indentation in the corner. This is old jib and it doesn't. So having covered it, you get a piece of your reinforcing tape, and that's the with the V. So where the V is, you pre-fold it, make sure it's looking like that for approximately the same height as your corner. And then all you do is you just put it in. Oops, that's the wrong one. That's the one. Put it into the corner. You position it down. And in this case, the principle is really just the same. You go from the top down one side. In this case, it's slightly longer. So a good thing about jib stuff is that you shove it in and then you can tear it off. It's pretty easy. So I'll demonstrate that. Okay, so there's my jib tape. And I want to cut it. All you do is simply hold it where you want to cut, and then you just rip it off. It rips off very easy, leaving that bit of jib, the tape in place. So again, if that's my join, I put it in place, hold it where I want to cut it, and you simply tear. And that's the way to do the jib. Most of the time it works really well. If I don't want that there, I'll take it off. Okay, so going back to the corner, don't push in too heavily. You're not trying to do too much at once. And then down the other side. And back up. What you're looking for is that there's no air bubbles underneath, and there's no huge great lumps of plaster left. You're not pushing too much, and that will do. And that's about it. Hope you enjoyed the video, and maybe do another one later.